Welcome back once again to the Imaginary Gallery. It is TJ, your host. We are continuing in Why Does He Do That? By Lundy Bancroft book. Somebody complained and said, you can't read books like that online and get away with it without paying royalties. Well, honeys, I ain't reading the book. I'm just using it as a guide and using my own words to steer you to information. We had left off on the brief exercise in which author Lundy Bancroft had suggested his class attendees take 2 or 3 minutes and make a list of all the beliefs they have about abusive people and what makes them that way. So now we are going to do it together. We'll start with the myth number 1, which you've probably heard. I know I have. He was abused as a child, and he needs therapy for it. Now, the author states that the romantic partners of his clients many times believe that the root of the partner's abusiveness can be found in some kind of ill treatment he received himself, and many professionals share this misconception. He hears explanations along the lines of,
"He called me all those awful names because that's what his mother used to do to him.
His dad used to get furious with him and beat him to a pulp with a belt. So now if I get angry at all, he just flips out and starts throwing things around the house. He says because deep down, he's really scared of my anger."
His stepmother was a wicked witch. I met her. She is horrifying. So now he really has this thing against ladies.
Now the question is it because he was abused as a child? And the author's answer is that many research studies have examined this type of question, and the link has turned out to be very weak. Other predictors of which men are likely to abuse their partners have proven far more reliable, as we shall see in the near future. Mostly men who are violent towards other men are many times victims of childhood abuse. But the connection is much less clear for those men who assault ladies. The one exception is that those abusers who are very physically violent or terrifying towards the ladies often do have histories of being abused when they were children. In other words, a bad childhood doesn't cause a person to become an abusive person, but it can contribute to making a person who is abusive especially dangerous. Lundy Bancroft tells us that if abusiveness were the product of childhood emotional injury, then these abusive people could overcome their problems through psychotherapy. But it's virtually unheard of for an abusive person to make any kind of substantial or long-lasting changes in his or her, pattern of abusiveness as a result of therapy. Now, he may work through other emotional difficulties, such as gaining insight into himself, but this evil behavior continues. In fact, it typically can get worse. And he may use therapy to develop new excuses for his ridiculous behavior, more sophisticated arguments to prove that the partner is the one who's flipped out, gaslighting, mentally unstable, and gives this person more creative ways to make the partner feel responsible for his emotional distress. Now, abusive people are sometimes masters of the hard luck story and may find that accounts of childhood abuse are one of the best ways they can use to get those heartstrings yanked on. Now, for some abusive men, our author states, the blame the childhood approach has an additional reason for being especially appealing. By this creature focusing on what mommy did wrong, he can blame a lady for his mistreatment. This could also appeal to the abused lady herself, since it makes sense out of his behavior and gives her somebody to be angry at who is safe, because getting angry with him seems to just blow up in her face. The wider society and the field of psychology in particular has many times jumped on this bandwagon instead of confronting difficult questions that partner abuse raises. Abuse of other people is so rampant that unless we can somehow make it our fault were forced to take on many different uncomfortable questions about the abusers and about much of their thinking. So it may seem easier just to lay the problem on the guy's mother or the girl's mother. The author's clients, who've participated extensively in therapy or substance abuse recovery programs, many times sound like therapists themselves. And if you have been, they adopt the terms of popular psychology or textbook theories. One client used to lure the author into intellectual debates with comments like,
"Well, your group follows a cognitive behavioral model, which has been shown to have limitations for addressing a problem as deep as this one."
An abusive person who is adept in the language of feelings can make his partner feel crazy by turning each argument into a therapy session in which he puts her reactions under a microscope and assigns himself to the role of helping her. He may, for example, explain what emotional issues she needs to work out and work through and analyze because she had mistakenly believed he had abused her. An abusive creature may embellish the childhood details of suffering once he or she discovers that it works and helps escape responsibilities. Next, the author mentions something that ties into current events, Pizzagate. He states that the National District Attorney Association Bulletin reported a revealing study that was conducted on a different group of destructive men. Pedophiles, child abusers. The researcher asked each man whether he himself had been sexually victimized as a kid. A hefty 67% of all the subjects said yes. However, the researcher then informed the men that he was going to hook them up to a lie detector test and ask the same question again. The affirmative answers suddenly dropped to only 29%. So in other words, all kinds of abuser tend to realize the mileage they can get out of saying, "Well, I only did it because it was done to me." Although the typical abusive person works hard to maintain a positive public image, it's true that some ladies have abusive partners who are downright nasty or intimidating to everybody. How about that man? Do his problems come from mistreatment by his parents? The answer could be both yes and no. It depends on which problem we're talking about. Now, the hostility he shows towards the human race may simply sprout from cruelty in his upbringing, but he abuses ladies because he's got an abuse problem. The two problems are related but distinct. Now, the author isn't stating that you should become unsympathetic to your partner's childhood suffering. An abusive person deserves the same compassion that a non-abused person does, neither more nor less. But a non-abusive person does not use its past as an excuse to treat you poorly. Feeling sorry for your partner can be a trap. It can make you feel guilty for standing up to his abusiveness. Now, sometimes our author, Lundy Bancroft, has stated to a client, if you're so in touch with your feelings from your abusive childhood, then you should know what abuse really feels like. You should be able to remember how miserable it was to be cut down to nothing, to be put in fear, to be told that abuse is your own fault. You should be less likely to abuse another person, not more so, from having been through it. Once the author makes this point, generally he stops mentioning the terrible childhood. He only wants to draw attention to it if it's an excuse to stay the same, not if it's a reason to change.
I am the Narcopath.
I swept you off your feet so quickly. I know that it seemed too good to be true. Well, duh, it was. I was gonna ride it out for as long as I could. I went along with anything and everything you did. So I might as well tell you. I did all that on purpose. I pretended to be into every single thing you were into. I did everything I could to help you whenever you needed it. The reason for all that was, I knew eventually you'd figure out the kind of gal I am. And I had to rack those things up, so when you told me that you thought you didn't want to see me anymore, I could throw them all back in your face and say, are you kidding? After I repaired your car windshield, you're just going to dump me over this one little lie? Oh, you heartless, horrible person. And I was playing victim, and it worked a few times now, didn't it? Not always, but I know my craft. Because honestly, I know you'd sit and think to yourself, she's right. She did do all these things, and here I am discarding her because of one little lie. That's one of them. Hi, good evening. I'm Sandy Hoaxtard. Bet you didn't expect to see me. I will no longer be censored, because it turns out I have some friends in high places, including Pedophile Island, the Lolita Express. I have connections there. I happen to work for a film developing company who happened to get a hold of some officials in compromising positions with children, which means that gives me the power, and I am back on TV, and no one's going to tell me what I can and can't say. What do you think about that? Say hello to real free press, real journalism. Oh, they use those children all the time. I think it's disgusting, but to each his own. The latest Sandy Hooker evidence. It's the biggest fraud in history. All these parents whose houses were paid for by the state or by the Obama or the whatever, they're millionaires now because they played a part of a simple hoax. Nobody died. As I've said in another episode, they didn't want to kill real people this time. It was too messy with the World Trade Center. They had parents and relatives and lovers demanding answers because their stupid, flimsy, retarded story held no water, and yet they still hired some stupid fool to go on television and say,
oh no, there's no evidence of any explosion. Oh, there's no evidence. We didn't even check to see if there were explosives. Because we're retarded.
And then people who originally got filmed were on there saying how they heard the explosions, and then they were later silenced and came back. Oh, well, I've made a mistake. It must have been something else that I heard. It must have been the woman behind me passing gas. People are so sick. I'm going to be joining the government soon. Hopefully. If my next blackmail goes through. Basically, it goes like this. If you don't hire me for this job, I'm going to turn these photographs in of you with Noah Posner licking his private parts in Pakistan and in Connecticut. So, make your choice. I don't have a lot of time now. No one's going to object to any piece of news I give because I'm Sandy Hoaxtard, signing off on TV5. Have a great evening.